Can you imagine there's somebody who's not a lover
I
tough?
couldn't understand.
All right, to answer your question, you asked about New York, and then did you have a question as well that we're gonna,
No.
what, you're making it simple? All right, New York was really nice. There was actually, they changed a lot of the schedule because a lot of the Israel rabbis couldn't make it, or we're told not to attend, like you're in wartime, you should be there. So a lot of this, I only landed Thursday night, but typically on Friday morning, you go to the Rebbe's resting place and they read a letter asking for prayers for, it runs the gamut. It goes for personal, communal, it has a lot of things that they pray for. And everyone signs on to this kind of prayer petition, if I could use that word. They changed that schedule. Instead of typically, let's say, reading that at 9, they read it at 8 because Shabbat in Israel began around 8:40 New York time. So the program's kind of shifted a little bit. So that was a 7:15. It's 45 minutes pretty much from Crown Heights where we were staying. And then Shabbat, that's happened to be my father's yard site, my grandfather's yard site. And then Saturday night, they have a program that's done in the Brooklyn Armory, which is a very large, it's been converted to like an athletic center of sorts, but it's a huge thing that's kind of walking distance to Crown Heights. There aren't places large enough that can host all the rabbis when they attend.
What's it, 1,400 people?
No, 1,400 did not show up. That's the Israel part.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So I think the number is like 6,500 minus 14 or something. I don't know exactly, but basically Saturday night, they had a really beautiful kind of presentation. There's speeches and, it's kind of a dinner and everything. But the presentation part was a video that had 3 different Chabad rabbis highlighting a story about connections and how just being part of a community and people really stepping up for you. One of them, which was really fascinating, all 3 of them were very fascinating, but one of them was a group from Ukraine. So a group from Ukraine, the war hits there. They end up taking 600 of the families to Ashkelon, Israel, and resettle there. The rabbi from this city in Ukraine is brothers-in-law with the rabbi in Ashkelon. Works out really well. Ashkelon in general has a Russian-speaking contingency, nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. So he's talking about how the minute the war works, how they were able to kind of he doesn't go with them. This rabbi doesn't go with them, but those families are taken care of, and he's talking about it. And then the war begins in Israel. You can imagine this is a traumatized group as it is. And then they're being re-traumatized. So that's one thing he talks about. The second one is a rabbi who his 3-year-old son, I think he was 3, on Lag BaOmer, they had like a program for their community. It's Tallahassee, Florida. They have a program for their community. And his 3-year-old son is outside and someone shoots an arrow and it hits him in his eye. So he talks about how literally, obviously, that's it. Life kind of stops. You have a community, a family, you have all these things that you need to take care of, but your family, you have to take care of this kid. And so he talks about how, first of all, in Florida, all those rabbis immediately made sure, hey, you don't have to worry about anything. They gave them food, money. They connected them to doctors in Miami because Tallahassee is a little bit further from there, who, first of all, remove this arrow, but then the question is if they should remove the eye or not, and all the questions that come with that. They don't. But the doctors there say, we really think we should. We'll reassess this in a week. So then they get them, the same group of rabbis, all these other Chabad rabbis, connect them to a doctor in New York. In New York, they basically are told kind of the same thing, right? We should probably remove this eye. It's never going to survive. And the whole time, who's taking care of his community? They sent people to Tallahassee to take care of their community, things for the kids, and it's a large family. And then they now go to California. And in California, same thing. The rabbis help them when they land. They have a place for them to stay. In fact, this kid has to lie face down for at least a week. And so they sent kids from their community to play with him. And there's a picture of him like on a massage table and 2 other kids like with games on the floor. So that was really, it was just talking about this, how, you're part of a Jewish community.
Right.
In our Chabad, it's, the amplified part, you're part of the Chabad movement in the sense of the rabbis. Everyone cares for each other. It's obviously an important theme during these days. The third,
Wait, what was the outcome?
his eye is, it's funny, his brother was here in the summer. He worked for the Roving Rabbis program, so I learned a little bit more about it. He still has his eye. I think one of the questions then was if he could see any light, like if it would just, so there's something there. Like they didn't remove it, but I don't know that he sees through it. But it's definitely at a place that something comes through there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. The third presentation, I don't remember what it was. I'd have to kind of look back to see what, these are the two that just stand out in my mind. So that was Saturday night. Sunday, they also changed their program. Sunday, the program typically is a couple workshops during the day. And then you have, well, first of all, the first thing is the picture, the big group picture. That's the pictures that you saw. That didn't change time-wise, but it did change to a prayer. So typically it's the picture. They made it into like a prayer program in the beginning and then the picture. That was really nice as well. And again, there's much less people because there's so many that didn't show up, that couldn't come to the bank, that couldn't come for the conference. So there's this like kind of, you're torn between two feelings. It's nice to be there and do your thing. But on the other hand, there are so many that are not there, and you feel it, by the way. There was more room by the picture. You can't tell that from the picture, but like I can tell you that there's like space. I didn't feel as crunched.
Well, 4,000 people.
It's still a lot, exactly. But you can imagine another 1,000 in that little space is totally. In fact, there's a guy from here, for those of you who know Steve Myrer. He doesn't come to this discussion, but do you know Steve Myrer? He has a daughter in Manhattan. And so he told me he wants to visit the Ohel when he's there. He's never been to the Rebbe's grave. And then while he'll do that, I told him, why not also come to Crown Heights and you'll visit like 770 and you go take a tour of the matzah bakery. Anyways, we thought it was last week, the date that he was coming. I connected my brother-in-law to him to help him with all this. Then they're conversing and he's like, no, the date is this week, like as in Sunday. So my brother was like, I can't do that. I have he's working on some of the programs for this conference, for the children's programs. So they decided they'll do it anyways on their own. So he went with his daughter and son-in-law to the Queens. They go to the Rebbe's resting place. Then they go to Crown Heights to 770. He's like, it was very interesting. There were all these kids sitting on bleachers. I'm like, besides for the picture that you saw of the adults, a lot of the children of the Chabad rabbis come. There's a program for them as well. That's a huge program for 4th through 8th grade. And so they also take a group picture. So he came there while they were taking the group picture. He's like, he didn't know what's going on, but so I sent him the picture so he could see the full picture of it. But so that was Sunday morning. It was like 39 degrees. I put that in my post. Yeah, it's pretty cold. And then the banquet, instead of being, let's say, a 5 o'clock type of a banquet, I think usually like 5:30 it starts or something like that. It ended up starting 12:30. And the reason for that was Israel had a banquet at the same time. They made a little conference. In fact, their stage was set up the same way. So on the screens, when it went back and forth, if you're watching the screen and you didn't look at your own stage, it happened to me once that they had an IDF soldier speaking. And I'm like, I watched the screen for that part. And I see that he's wearing like the green kind of sash. So he'll be holding a rifle. I don't see the rifle. I'm like, that's so weird. They brought this guy with a prop, because he's clearly not going to be wearing a rifle in New York. And I tell my friend, he's like, no, you got confused. That was in Israel. The stage was set up exactly the same. They had some really nice parts to that, but I'll tell you that the most powerful kind of presentation at the banquet was a 9-year-old kid from Sderot, the Chabad rabbi's son. He came on kind of wearing a bulletproof vest and a helmet just for the, kind of share how he looks. And there was pictures of him in Sderot like that. But this is what he said, and I thought it was so powerful and so true. He said that they have 12 seconds from when a siren goes on to get into a bunker. 12 seconds. So he asked everyone to kind of close their eyes. It's a 9-year-old kid, right? Close your eyes and do the countdown, 12 seconds. So they closed the lights in the room and put 12 seconds on the screens. like a ding, ding. And after 12 seconds, he said, think about how much you can do in 12 seconds, right? How many mitzvot you can do, how many blessings you can do, how many prayers you can do. It was really, really, I'm going to say emotional, but also it's just so true. Like they can kill people in 12 seconds. We can do so much more good in those 12 seconds. And so that was really the highlight of it. Like I walked away with that. 12 seconds. Here we talk about in America, or at least in Arizona, if you've heard it, 2 seconds is too long. It's the campaign for child drownings in pools and bathtubs. And you always talk about how 2 seconds is too long. In Israel, 12 seconds is so short, right? Think about it. He said in his speech, he said that you can most times he makes it to the bunker, but many times you just have to, lie down on the floor and cover your head. I think I think the wording was like thousands of times I make it. Sometimes we don't. And you think about it, it's like our life, we have the amount of seconds in a day. If you wanted to go like that, we could do so much. And if you talk about minutes or hours, and so it's about really utilizing our time and capitalizing on that. So there was really an amazing, like, I'm going to say feeling. It's like dual emotions. It's like what we're all going through. A lady who we're close to, who came to like our Shabbat dinner recently, she was sitting at your table, Carol. So she told me something really interesting. She lives in California. She's very involved in JNF there. And she was on some sort of like a trip through Europe. And she was posting, like I follow her on Facebook. And October 7th happens. She no longer posted. She's like, yes, my trip is still going on, but how can you show that you're celebrating and enjoying while people are suffering? And so you had that same feeling, like, yeah, we can be together, but think about how many people couldn't come. And so in the pictures that I shared, I shared 2 pictures, but really there are 3 pictures that are going around. There's a picture of the conference here in Brooklyn, which is about 4,000 people in the picture. There's a picture of the Israel Chabad rabbis, which I did not share. I didn't have that when I posted, which is like all the rabbis at the conference, they took a group photo. In that same group photo, there was another photo taken. This is what I did share. I don't know how many people are in this picture, but it is all the Chabad rabbis that are in IDF uniforms because they're all soldiers. So it was quite fast. I did put that picture on. It's like it's just fascinating. You think about, and to go back to your question about Orthodox and Hasidic, which I'll get to in a minute, a lot of people think that the religious people don't fight in the army. I think really the way that people should say it is they'd like more people to be in the army. It's very clear that there are plenty of religious people in the army, but there are some fascinating things. I think some of you may have read in the last, I think it was 2 weeks ago, they put a report out, which I thought was fascinating. They have a quota that the Israel government wants every single year of enlistments of religious 18-year-olds. And their number is 2,000. In a year, they want 2,000. They got that in a week and a half. So like, it is a fascinating, you can just turn it, I'll know if it's the one. You want me to show you which one it is?
No, if they wanted to see it.
Oh, I can share it on my phone. I'll show it to you afterwards. Or you can pass your phone around, but I'll show it as well afterwards. So it is very amazing how much, and I think it's so important that we don't forget this, how connected we are and how much we feel connected, and to not lose that momentum when the war kind of starts trudging and people begin to remember that they didn't like each other before this. I think that's very important to remember. I'll show it to Judy afterwards if you want to see it. So that's kind of the short answer to how my weekend was really nice. I also stay at my brother's house who lives in Brooklyn. So there's a personal side that's really nice. I get to see friends that I don't get to see. I see family that I don't get to see. So, you're constantly moving because you want to see everyone. So
is there a study, prayer, anything on Saturday during the day?
The answer is yes. I'll explain. So in general, all the prayers are happening every day, right? Because everyone there is observant, so they're going to services. So Saturday does have a program, but the program is more like the lunch after, like the meal. But not everyone goes to that. So like I go to family. But there are a lot of people who don't have family there, so that's for sure needed. So it's not something that I go to, but definitely there are parts of the program. Like for me, I typically not this year because my dad had the yard site, so I was helping him with with a minion to have a service that he wanted to do the service at my brother's house. Um, I go to a friend's house in the morning, we'll study, and then I daven at another shul because it's where I have other friends. You got to get around. And then lunch, I eventually make it to Connie's grandmother because the night before I do with my side, it's like you got to get around. So that's a lot of walking. In fact, I sat next to on Friday morning at at breakfast. I sat next to a friend, and at that table is full of Argentinians. One of them is a cousin of mine. So he tells me, my mom's from Argentina. So he tells me, he's like, he's doing so much walking here. He didn't, he thought he walks a lot in Argentina. He's like, over here, he's just, everywhere you go, you're walking. So it's true. It's like never ending walking. I mean, unless you just stick to your, place, but if you're seeing people, you're walking. So it was definitely really nice. You don't really have time. You go to sleep late, wake up early, especially because everything's changed a little bit. Like Saturday, for example, the program ended around midnight, around that time. And then the next morning, the picture starts at 8. Like they open it that you can come there. It's nice also to see there are a number of Chabad rabbis that are chaplains in the military. So they come in their uniforms, right? They come in their military uniforms. So they're in the picture and and it's a nice, you get to see a lot of people that you either grew up with or you met along the way. So that's really nice. Like I went to the banquet, which is an hour and 15-minute drive from Brooklyn. It's done at the New Jersey Expo or something. It's like an hour and 15 minutes, Edison, New Jersey. I went with my friend who drove. They have buses for this, but my friend lives in Bel Air, Maryland. And so he'll drive from the banquet home. So I go one way with him. But in his car, he had a brother-in-law and then a friend who I'm not close with. Like it's not my friend, it's my friend's friend. But the conversations in that ride it's like an hour and 15 minutes. So you can ask about different things and things come up.
Right.
So it's just nice to connect. I'm going to say that you learn a lot from connecting more than maybe the workshops are amazing too, but I didn't come for workshops this year. So, I didn't get that. They had mental health education that you actually got some sort of a certificate for some sort of a teaching. I mean, they have a lot of stuff. So they have financial things, they have everything. And then the best workshops are outside of the workshop. You're talking to people. You can say or ask. So yeah, it's definitely, it was really nice. Now to answer your question, the difference between Hasidic and Orthodox. So I'm going to back it up first to explain the difference between Reform, Conservative, Orthodox to kind of give some clarity to that question. So Orthodox really means, the way I define it and the way you'll see others define it, is that an adherence to the original law and tradition, right? An unchanging belief that the Torah was given by God, is divinely inspired and not by man, which means we keep it as is. Whatever God knew then, he knew now as well. And so in that regard, Orthodox, when you say that, is like an adherence to an original set of law. Reform and Conservative are changes to that, each different. And I always challenge people. I say this all the time. I've said it here. I hear all the time people say, oh, I go to Reform or I grew up Orthodox. And I've shared many times that people don't know what that means, right? You just know where you pray. But the real differences of theology, if I can use that word, no, they don't know the difference. I don't know that you would be able to tell me the difference between Reform and Conservative, can you?
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey.
Well, we'll go around the room on this one if you want to start.
Jeffrey grew up conservative and I was Reformed.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Jeffrey's service was basically all in Hebrew. But everybody talked. Like, they didn't sit and listen. Everybody was so busy. Which to me was terribly disturbing.
Right.
I didn't like it because I personally didn't get anything out of it. There's a lot more dialogue, I think, in Reform Judaism. And it brings me personally more into the picture.
Okay, got you. More fulfilling.
Yeah.
All right, Judy, since you said you know the difference. By the way, I just want everyone to know I'm still gonna challenge what you said. Not in a good or bad way. I'm gonna my question still stands after listening. That's what I want to clarify what I mean by that. Your turn.
Reform.
And you can't get this right or wrong. I'm not, this isn't, I want to hear how people kind of the perception.
Reform, well, depending on the reform, there's also within the reform, there's the very reform, and then there's the not so very reform. But they don't usually have a Saturday morning service. They usually, most of the places I know, have an hour Torah study. When my grandson.
You're saying the service is more Friday night.
Yes, it is. They don't, generally their kiddush, or their own is done before services, not after. It's.
These are probably shul differences, like, I don't.
I think so, but it's.
Again, like I think, well, yeah, I'm gonna say like in Arizona, you could probably find 2 Reform congregations that do it differently. So
True, true.
I wouldn't use those as my definitions, but continue.
Thing I.
Yeah, what's the-
That there's not a Saturday morning service.
Okay.
Unless there's a bar about mitzvah.
Okay, but we haven't even gotten into the meat and potatoes of the differences. Do you have something else to add?
Yeah. Reform allows women to be on the beam.
So does conservative.
So it's conservative.
What-
Maybe not when you first married your husband, though. Like that definitely changed.
Oh, because.
But again, I think this is already going into more,
Right,
you
well,
know,
my second
kind of
daughter
religious part of
was
that.
the first girl
Bat mitzvah.
that way, that had her bat mitzvah on Saturday morning and read Torah.
Got you.
And a haftarah. My oldest daughter only did a haftarah, but that was on Friday night.
All right, we've got 2 opinions here so far. They're not very different than each other. Did you want to add to this? And by the way, there's no right or wrong. I am curious to hear how people perceive it.
Sure, if I may add, I think that the conservative movement even developed, because people wanted, I think a lot of times when it was redeveloped, reform was really reform. And the big reforms come along closer, like, they kind of temple side and they follow anything wrong and they're setting on the service for it all.
I think they do.
Conservative people try to be more observant than reform, but at the same time make some exceptions, significant exceptions.
Right.
Compared to the orthodox approach. The service, Bethel has this very minion, they have a service on Shabbat,
Right, Judy, you go there, right? Where do you go when you go to services?
I live streamed to.
Oh, you're still doing Chicago.
Which.
She moved here, but she still does Chicago.
That's Shalom.
My husband was a.
I know,
And we're.
you've talked.
Bethel are people that are, quote unquote, more observant.
Right.
That are less observant. Kashrut is considered kashrut the conservative style. In other words, I will go to eat at a restaurant and have something like pasta or
Right.
fish,
Eat the meat.
No meat out. And in our house.
Right, so these are all, I'm gonna say ancillary to the actual question. Did you want to add anything?
No.
Do you have an observation?
Well.
Kind of like what,
But
but
more so what.
got you, Steve.
It's, to me, it's a lifestyle. And I know that's not getting into the meat of things, but it's more of a lifestyle.
But actually, that's what I think if you caught, that's exactly what everyone was talking about, right? So when I say, what does conservative or reform mean? It's what synagogue fit your lifestyle. I'm using your words for a second.
True.
Better.
Yes.
But really, if I were to go into the meat and potatoes of it, I will share a story that I always found fascinating after I read this once. And I'm like, wow, that's good perspective. And it's without even getting into the meat and potatoes. They had this forum in Manhattan, and I don't know how many years ago. And they had a rabbi that was Orthodox, a rabbi that was conservative, and a rabbi that was Reform on stage. No. Close. So or a bar, right? So they basically are giving an opportunity for anyone in the crowd to ask a question. And so if you're in a crowd of more people that are not Orthodox, I'm using that as my way of describing the crowd, who do you think they're going to pick on the most?
The
Orthodox rabbi, right?
Right.
So the first question that comes up is to the Orthodox rabbi. And the question is a question that bothers a lot of people. It says, why don't you accept conservatives and reforms conversions? Good question and tough, right? You didn't start slow. You went straight at a real difference. The rabbi's answer caught everyone off guard. He said, why are you asking me this question? Why don't you ask the conservative rabbi why they don't accept the reform conversion? And people didn't know that. And you can imagine the rest of the night, the rabbi who was Orthodox sat in the corner of the stage and didn't have another question directed at him. People were finding out, oh, wait, it's not an reform and conservative versus an Orthodox, or it ended up being like, oh, there's a reason why there's 3 different groups. They all have differences. And so I always share that story to say, it's like, wait a second, most of us end up in a shoal or a community that is comfortable. And you kind of gave a great example of that. You went to, let's say with your husband, and the service is in Hebrew. And like you said, there's a lot of talking that happens in our shul too. And it's like, where's the meaning of prayer? And then I'm going to give you the example of the reverse though. Let's say I walked into your shul. I'm going to say, what the heck is this? That's not how I know prayer. Prayer just comes from the top and everyone just sits there. And then it's like, that's more church-like. The shul, everyone says the prayer on their own, right? Everyone's going to use their lines at each other. I don't mean that literally. I'm saying this is like this, the next observer is going to throw that at you. And it's like, so what is the reason why we end up in different shuls? It's really, I really believe it's out of comfort. And so now there are people who might have true theological conversations, but the average Jewish person, more than the average might be 99%, end up in communities that are most comfortable for them. The style, the rabbi, whatever that is. So, and I like that you shared Beth El, for example, and I'll share another thing that I read in the Jewish news that I loved here. Beth El has a daily minyan. So a person who didn't grow up with it, like, wow, that's really religious. And then you're going to go to the Beth El and they're going to say, no, we're not Orthodox. That's religious. Or however you phrase it. You know, each person says whoever does more is religious or a fanatic or whatever. In the Jewish news, they had a really good letter to the editor here in Phoenix. A number of years ago, there was a very big controversy. The JCC had an event that didn't have kosher food.
Ooh.
Okay. And the original letters that came out was like, you're excluding the Orthodox. And, you know, which is true. But here was the greatest perspective. And it really helped me because I don't know that I was thinking like this. There was a guy from Peoria, maybe. I remember it was like West Valley or something, who wrote a letter to the editor and he says, you're not just excluding Orthodox. There are so many people that keep kosher. It's not an Orthodox thing. It's a Jewish thing. So you're excluding more than just Orthodox by doing that. And so for me, that was very important to read. Not that I maybe lived in an era, I just never kind of brought into my idea when they were talking about that in that context. So to go back to our original question, the real difference between Orthodox, conservative, and reform are for the general people are just levels of comfort. But if I were to go into like kind of the more theological or to go into more of the meat and potatoes, as I've been saying, conservative movement when it began did a lot of things that were Orthodox. And they said again, I'm going to give you an example of how their process worked. Anything that they changed, they used like a rabbinical body to change it. It wasn't because it's more convenient. They gave like an entire Jewish law responsa, if I can call it that.
Yes.
Of why something was allowed or not allowed. So for example, they didn't say you should drive to Shul on Shabbos. They said their answer was that driving might be fine in the context. I have never read their response on that, which would kind of say limit it to go to Shul. I don't know if you've ever read some of these letters. I've never read it, but I know how their thoughts were. Like I've read a couple of their answers just to see how they. Okay, so they did it like it had to fit within their framework of Jewish law with explanations. I don't know what they based it on. I'm not going into that part. I don't know. Reform kind of came from a totally different perspective and said, listen, and this is something that you highlighted. The Reform movement came about not because of how to live Jewishly and make it meaningful. It was, we're Jewish, but we're going to do things to keep away anti-Semitism, using one of their theories. And therefore, why don't keep kosher? If you keep kosher, it separates you. You can't be with your non-Jewish friends. Then that separation causes animosity. 1913, Philadelphia Convention. Just using one of their things. So their entire perspective was not like that. It was more about, how do we get people in the door? How do we do this?
Yeah.
And like you said, there was actually like no God within it, right? They didn't wear yarmulkes in many synagogues in the beginning,
Yes.
or a tallis. And so it really was church-ish, right? People need a culture, a place to gather. I don't know the theory behind this. I'm not giving you really real answers. But that was something that was way further away than anything traditional. Reform movement has 100% brought back a lot of
Uh-huh.
mitzvot. I think, to use Temple Chais, and I don't know who mentioned that, you did. I think when they started, they had a Rabbi Burke, who, if I understand correctly, from people who were in his congregation then, every year he added like another prayer and another mitzvah, and that's why people loved him, for the people who do like him, because he grew with them, and they grew with him, right? So I'm not going into all the other stuff that he is connected to in that synagogue. The people who love him grew in their Judaism with him. And I hear that all the time. So it's very fascinating. But again, I don't even know why the Reform movement the Reform movement grew out of Germany. It was really about moving away from God. Just to use a very interesting thing, Theodor Herzl, who is celebrated in Israel as kind of the founder, do you know that there are quotes of his that sound anti-Semitic? His theory and idea was that really all Jews, to remove anti-Semitism, should convert to Christianity. But because that will never happen, we need it. I'm telling you, I can find the quote. Because that will never happen, because he'll never convince the Orthodox. That's why we need a state of Israel, or that's why we need our own place. He has some very crazy ideas out there. In fact, there is a really cool video, if I can find this afterwards, if someone reminds me, of someone going on the streets, using a quote from him, and asking people, who do you think said that? And some of them are, borderline anti-Semitic. But when it's a Jew, it's not anti-Semitic. So I share that not to throw him, under the bus. I share that because the movement to kind of remove God from the Jews, which is kind of what that original movement was, has changed a lot today. Maybe because they realize the next generation. There's a fascinating thing. I don't know how true this is, but I believe it is. One of the original Reform synagogues or congregations in now they say congregation. Whatever it was, I think it was in Michigan, but I could be wrong. They were celebrating 100-year anniversary. And they said, wouldn't it be nice if we found some of the original founding families and honored them? Do you know that they couldn't find a single Jewish offspring?
Really?
Yeah.
Because they.
So again, I don't know if that's an embellishment of it, and like you go like 100 is 4 generations. Remember that, because the next generation maybe had less than that, and then the 3rd generation had no one marrying a Jew, and their kids didn't live Jewishly. Again, I don't know the exact. I can probably find this. It was written. That's how I saw it. And it had a name, but again, I don't know if it means that they literally didn't find anyone, or they were trying to really make a point of how far away it went generations. Yeah.
The thing you were talking about was the rabbi was asked about conversion. Now, if you have, let's say you have somebody that converts Orthodox, and then they get married, and they end up having a great home.
Right.
And person went to a conservative or maybe a reform conversion, keeps kosher, brings their children kosher, grandchildren are.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of rude for people like me.
Right. These are good questions, by the way. These are the things that people struggle with in the sense of, I know exactly what you mean by that. And I see this too. You find people who went through the Orthodox conversion. It's like they did it kind of for marriage, is a lot of times, like, so they never meant it. They don't live it maybe 2 years later or maybe a month later, right? And you have other people who are, I hear this all the time. It's like, my daughter-in-law or whoever it is converted, and she's like so involved in her community and doing everything. So I think part of the answer to that is really not an answer. Part of that is like an emotional question because it's a true question, right? On the other hand, I could talk about conversion next if you want, like just to touch it. I'll go first back to this question. Those are good questions. And to go back to this stage where they had the 3 rabbis for a moment, he was just bringing out a point. He's like, don't think there's a reason why there's 3, not 1 and 2. Right? People would like to believe it's like that, but really there are differences between all. I like to always share, and I hope everyone really believes it here between ourselves, not believe that I mean it. If you're Jewish, it doesn't make a difference where you practice. It doesn't make a difference if you ever show up at shul. You are equally loved and connected and whatever else. The difference is our exterior, and that's what bugs people and makes fights, are the exterior. But internally, we're all one. And so that is very difficult, where people forget that. And then we have fights. So in the end of the day, if we can see past those, we can totally have much more to do together. And I do believe that, October 7th really put that back into the perspective of many people's minds. But to come back to your original question, first you have to understand Orthodox. Then you can go into the different groups within Orthodox. So any person who falls into the Orthodox category means that they are following this divinely inspired set of laws that do not change. They are from God. They are timeless. And so now you can go into categories within it. What is modern Orthodox? What is Haredi? What is Hasidic? What is Litvish or Litvak, Lithuanian Jewry? They all believe at the core the same thing. There are things that might change in how they practice things, but at the core level of how they practice, it's equal. So you might go into a Hasidic community or into their prayer, and it might be more lively and joyous. You might go into another, there's a type of dress that's different, tradition, history. The modern Orthodox, they're celebrating Shabbat the same way, right? They're not driving, they're praying the same prayers. Maybe you'll find that they're more into the world of business, whereas the others are more insular, but those are not Jewish those are not Jewish law things. Those are more customs and traditions and the culture within the culture, right? You talk about Sephardic and Ashkenaz. Those are 2 major differences within Orthodox, within Judaism, but even within Orthodox. So really, that's the short answer to the question. Now I can go into what is Hasidic, right? So in the 1700s, Judaism is at a very big low. Why are they at a low? They had just come through the pogroms, massacres throughout Europe. Being Jewish was associated with depression. It was like, this is not a good time for us. You had a rabbi, his name was the Baal Shem Tov, or he was known as the Baal Shem Tov. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem, master of the good name. He took it upon himself to go from city to city, talk to Jewish people who are less learned, and tell them how cherished and how much God loves them. In those days, the rabbis, the more studious, the ones who knew how to live Jewishly in the sense of action, were like on a pedestal. And if you were of the simple folk, you revered them, but you didn't feel the same. And his mission was say, hey, just because this guy knows more doesn't mean that you're any less Jewish and loved by God. And he went literally town to town and talked about this love for your fellow Jew. And his message included this idea that you serve God with joy. A lot of people in those days, there was a movement that many of you might have heard and didn't know it's actually related to this. Have you heard of the Musar movement?
Sure.
Musar, have you heard of it?
No.
So Musar is an idea that says stay away from. There is there is an idea that says, how do I serve God? One is by not doing the wrong things, right? I can talk about the do nots all day long. So I just dumbed it down, by the way. I mean, if someone really studies Musar, they might get upset at me. But the idea is do not do bad, right? It's a no type of a theory. It's like, if you have bad thoughts, it will lead to this. If you do this, so the idea of being Jewish and celebrating your Jewish identity was closely aligned with an idea that said, if you sin, you're going to have this disconnect. And it's like very fire and brimstone to a degree. He came out with this whole other thing. It's like, no, cherish every moment that you have. A single mitzvah. I'll share a story that I read today, actually. A single mitzvah, you are connected to God. Don't worry about the all or nothing. In the 1970s, or I could check the date. This is a story I read today. Theodore Bickel was one of the highlighted speakers at a rally for the Jews of Russia that was organized by people who were really trying to get Jews out of Russia, but public campaigns against Russia and communism. Chabad was very against those because being boots on the ground in Russia, they knew that if you provoke the bear, it actually made them do the opposite. So Chabad was very into not public stuff. And so there's actually big letters between Kahana and the Rebbe of disagreements. In fact, in this story, it says Mayor Kahana at a certain point said there was 150 Jews that were going to be able to get out of Russia. They had visas. And he decided to do like this public protest. And the Rebbe said they're going to tear up those visas. And so he said, I don't care if 150 people have their visas torn. The long game is that the rest of the Jews will be let out. And the Rebbe said, you sit here in America in comfort. And because of you, 150 people who are living in communist Russia who can't live. It's easy for you to say that. It's like, where's your love for your fellow Jew? These 150 people can leave. So very big differences. They had this very big thing. The Rebbe said that Chabad would definitely not participate. But he said he sent 3 people as messengers of his to be at this rally in the back and get people to do a mitzvah, to put on tefillin. It was a ferry that would take them to where this rally was. I could read the text again, just read the story. Anyways, the 3 young students, Chabad students, 20, 21-year-olds, are on the ferry. They get on the first ferry, and they see Theodore Bickel is on their ferry. So they said, wouldn't it, if we wanted people to put on tefillin, let's get the featured speaker, who everyone's crowding around, all these students, to put on tefillin. Everyone else will. Or at least it will be easier. One of them goes up to him. The other 2 are afraid. They think this is crazy. As it is, you have to realize nowadays to see a Chabad guy ask someone to put on tefillin is like, okay, it's been happening for a long time. This is 1970 or something, maybe 75. I don't know what year it was. It was a year after the Rebbe started this campaign of asking people to do a mitzvah, put on tefillin. And so one of them goes up to Theodore and he says, oh, Lubavitcher Chassid, follower of the Rebbe. So he says, how do you know? Like, I know who you are. You're an actor. I was like, how do you know who I am? He says, what do you mean you're dressed like one? Right? Because their whole point was to be in the back. So anyways, he asked him to put on tefillin. So he says, why would I put on tefillin? I don't keep kosher. I don't keep Shabbat. I don't do any of these things. Isn't that like hypocritical to a degree? And so now one of the other friends steps up and says, just one mitzvah at a time. God cares about each mitzvah. Don't worry about what you're not doing. What you do is important. And by the way, this message is what the Baal Shem Tov began in 1700s. In those days, you had people who were doing all the mitzvah. They just didn't know more than the simple, we do this. And so Theodore Bickel puts on the tefillin. He wears a pin that they gave him because this is like a year into this. They had a pin that says, I put on tefillin today, kind of like a proud little pin. And he wore it at the rally when he spoke. At the end of his speech, he said, if you really want to do something for Russia, there are 2 Chabad kids in the back with a table. Go put on tefillin. And it says like over 1,000 people, they literally were putting on tefillin until night, until sunset. Point is that what is this love for your fellow Jew, regardless of what they do, how you live? Where does this love come from? So that is started in the 1700s by the Baal Shem Tov. Who hated that? Who hated his message? The religious Jews. The biggest opposition to the Hasidic movement were religious Jews. Why? Because he said that you and I, who are simple folk, are just as good as the big rabbi. So, hey, they're not going to revere the rabbis, the new idea in Judaism, serve God with joy. And so, in fact, as you look at the movement's beginning, some of the Chabad rabbis were put in prisons, and the original complaints came from religious Jews who were trying to stop this idea, saying that they're not real Jews, they don't really keep it, it's a cult, all the famous calls. So it's obviously so many years later since then. But that idea of the Hasidic movement began from that one rabbi. He had a group of students, they were known as the Holy Society, if I can use that word, who helped him go from town to town to uplift all these Jewish people who really were depressed at that time. It was a terrible time to be Jewish. And so then the successor, and this is where every single Hasidic group begins. A student is sent, let's say, to a city to be a rabbi there, but a Hasidic rabbi, people gravitate towards him. And now you have, I'm just going to give you an example, Satmar. Where does the Satmar group come from? They were in a city called Satmar in Hungary. Right, that's where the name comes from. It doesn't mean anything more than a city. You've heard of Lubavitch, Chabad Lubavitch.
Yeah.
Lubavitch is a city in Russia. It's called the city of love. Right? Chabad is a totally different idea. That's an idea, not a city. Chabad is mind over heart. It's what the teachings preach, that your mind should control your emotions. And if you do that, you'll kind of serve God differently. You'll have less. Our emotions are what draw us to do things, right? Sometimes those emotions control our minds. We don't do the right thing. That's the idea of Chabad. It's intellect. So again, this is the idea of the Hasidic movement. So in Israel, when you now talk about there are all these different Hasidic groups, they don't all agree on everything. They look different. They practice certain things differently. At their core, there is a core that says serving God with joy. Breslov Hasidim, you know, the ones that go around the vans and dancing on top, they're a Hasidic group. Their whole thing is if you serve God with joy. So they're going to do a dancing. It's not about study necessarily. Each person does their own kind of teachings within it, but that is kind of the idea. They are an Orthodox group if we were going to use the label of Orthodox.
Something you said that was very important about Chabad, in my experience, going back many years, is the fact that you do have that feeling where you're fellow Jews and the importance of the connection. Both our kids went to the University of Arizona, and down there, I think it was Rabbi Shem Tov.
Yeah, it was Rabbi Shem Tov then.
He was fantastic. So, but he wasn't asking me to do anything specifically, but he was there. Right. I went down there for Sukkot. His dad gave a beautiful drash on Sukkot. But I mean, it was just, and then the same thing up here in Phoenix. And the reason why, Mary and I have been interested in being part of Bible seniors and that sort of thing is just because we feel that you're not just making it up. You feel that,
right.
I've seen it across two generations already so far. That kind of feeling and the love you have for your fellow Jew and whatever, wherever we fit in on that, reform.
The spectrum, the spectrum. No, thank you. Yeah, so for me, like one of the biggest things is like one of the taglines that you find is tags are for shirts. Right? It's not tags are for shirts. Are you Orthodox, conservative, reform? People like to put themselves in groups, but really that's just, I like to, like what I always share is like, no, that's where you go to shul, right? Okay, you grew up reformer, you grew up conservative, whatever. That's where you end up in synagogue, but it's not. That doesn't define me or you. I'm not Orthodox, I'm Jewish. That's really what it is. Yeah. Did I answer your original question though?
Yes, you did. Thank you. So when I was doing humanitarian work in Ukraine in 1996 and 4 years, well, my last day was 9/11.
Wow.
I was trying to reach Jewish women who somehow thought that they were Jewish, but didn't know how or what.
It meant to be, right?
The Lubavitchers got there before I did. And they did a certain set of teaching. My first Shabbat, we gathered and we were gonna have a service. And I gave a Kiddush cup to a woman and said, would you do the honor of doing Kiddush for us? She said, no. I was taught it has to be a man. So I said, well, we are a woman's group. The only man there was my bodyguard.
Right.
So I said, we need a woman.
Someone has to do it.
And no one would do it.
Really?
So in typical Janie form.
You did it.
No.
No.
I opened my purse and I took out a lip liner, a pencil, and I drew a mustache, and I drew a beard on her, and I held up the mirror, and I said, now you look like a man. Here's the Kiddush cup. And I got my point across.
Right.
And it was just something that will always stick.
I'll share something interesting. What you said, it touches 2 points, which I like. My daughter sent me, I'm in New York, right? So we do Kiddush. Obviously, I don't have a picture of who did Kiddush at her Kiddush at that Friday night dinner. But after Shabbat, we do the Havdalah ceremony at home every week, which I'll read the prayer. Cup of wine or grape juice, whatever it is. My daughter did it. So she sends me the video. I guess she asked Hani to video it and said, please don't share. But like, she's all proud of herself that she did it, which is a beautiful thing. So I 100% know what you mean, but I will share. And this is what the other part is. Why is it that in Israel, you really don't find the conservative or reform movement in a grand fashion the way it is in America? If you think about it, right? There is a movement, they call it Masorti.
Yeah.
But you don't find it the same way. There's very few. I think you even said when you were in Israel, in Jerusalem, I think there's one synagogue that you went to, right?
Where I dressed the Torah.
Yeah, in Jerusalem, right? But there aren't there's hundreds of shoals. I think part of it really goes back to this idea is like what you said. What did they grow up with tradition? A lot of them come from the traditional family that lived in either Iraq, Iran, whatever, all those countries. It's a very masculine dominated. So like they grew up, their show was always separate seating. It doesn't bother them. But when you talk about families here, that what they know is more of the mixed seating, to go into a show with separate seating bothers them. So it's really about where we were brought up, right? For somebody who was brought up with separate seating, it's normal. Doesn't bother. Like you don't think twice. I shared this with Rabbi Khan. I was at a wedding with him 2 weeks ago. And he knew more about this. I didn't know about it. But in Germany, there was a reform congregation that was offered 1 million marks. It's a lot of money to remove the mechitza. And they said no. It's a reform congregation. Right? So he said that only changed a little later. So even them, they had to have like if you're going to start a movement and go deep end, right? When I say deep end, I mean so different than everyone else. People are like, what the heck is that? So even in reform, then when it started, it still had a lot of, the show looked the same. Like they had a mechitza and I'm sure the service didn't look the same, but like there was a part of it that was very different. And there was a part of it that had the same look. So I don't know the history of why and what, but it was still irrational to remove that divider. Yeah, I don't know if I know that actually, if I understand correctly, even some of them, as synagogues in America changed, some of them had family seating and separate seating.
I think
Yeah.
so, like,
You have seen that?
yeah, the daughter of a friend of mine was married, and she married a much more.
So they had like for everyone to feel comfortable
And yeah, they had women's tables, men's tables.
and mixed tables.
Mixed tables.
So yeah, again, no problem. Take care. Nice seeing you though. Yeah. Yeah. So this is,
It's really great.
I didn't get to answer your question, so I'll have to come back to that next month, God willing.
Okay. Thank you.
But it's a good question.
Be well.
Take care, Steve.
When you were talking about men and women, I remember someone asked my first rabbi I ever became familiar with. Someone asked him about, there was a man, and there was, I guess he was a widow, and something about lighting candles Friday night. And he said, better you light the candle than sit in the dark.
Right, it's actually the tradition actually is to light candles. Like if you're single or widowed, whatever the
Well, I
reason.
do kiddush.
No, not you. I'm talking about men.
I know.
Oh, exactly. You just flipped the script on me. Good job. Yeah, the traditional things that are maybe for men or for women, when you are the only one, you would do it. There are very few things in Judaism that a man wouldn't do or a woman wouldn't do, depending on the situation. But like you said, Shabbat candle lighting, a man would do it if there's no one else at home.
But what if there is a woman?
Then the woman should do it.
So,
But the man could do it if let's say I always light candles because I'm a single guy. And today I'm going to be at your house. I could technically light it still. It's my tradition right now, right? But technically, if I'm in a house that has Shabbat candles, that I don't need to do it.
but Steve Pott sometimes calls a husband and a wife up, and the man will light the candles. And I didn't quite get that.
Honestly, you'd have to ask him on that one. I would assume it's not. I mean, that definitely doesn't.
It doesn't sound kosher.
I'm not going to say kosher. That's a very strong word. No, I wouldn't say it's not kosher or kosher. I don't know what the reason. It could be that they don't know more, right? A lot of people did not grow up with lighting candles. So when you get called up and it's like, the husband does it, maybe comforts and whatever. I don't know, but you can ask him privately. He'll probably have an answer for you.
I'll keep all this.
So you'll have to ask him.
When the conservative movement decided that it was okay for girls to read Torah on Saturday, my daughter was the first girl to do it.
Right. So by the way, one of the good conversations, not for now, is to really talk about, okay, so why is it that our tradition had it this way? We know that the reason why it changed in these congregations was because of egalitarian reasons. Like, why should we be any different? Which is a conversation in its own, right? But that was a conversation that was going on all throughout America and the world. And it played into the synagogue life as well. So that's a longer conversation, but a good conversation to have. That doesn't mean that you might know the answer and change how you, sometimes we know the right answer. It doesn't mean we change what we do. It's like, no, that's what everyone else is doing. I want my child to have that experience or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Even though you might say that doesn't really jive with the reason, or I don't, that's just how life is. So bless you. But anyways, that is the answer to your question. And any other last questions?
One last.
Sure.
thing, yes. At Hanukkah, we normally put, our 10 flowers outside.
Oh, you do it outside?
Well, we light the candles inside, but we have an electronic one.
Oh, okay.
Put outside. And some of our friends have said in this current environment, do you want to do that? And my feeling is, I'm Jewish. I don't care what other people.
Right.
How other people look at this, but they're afraid that we're gonna get attacked or a house is gonna be looked at.
Right. I need to find this answer if I have it.
Yeah.
But I know an answer. There was someone who wrote a really nice thing. That's what I'm looking for. The short answer is I'm in agreement with you. In fact, I shared it. Everyone's a lot entitled to that moment. It's like, well, do I really want to get into that?
Yeah.
And the fact is the way that the menorah has moved from the outside, the original thing was to light it outside or in your window. And because of anti-Semitism, it was moved inside.
Yeah.
Are we at that point in America that we have to, I don't think so, at least personally.
Well,
And if,
there is things going on.
oh, of course.
Yeah,
But I'm saying, for me, what's the answer to anti-Semitism? It's being Jewish proudly.
Yes, that's exactly.
Right. In fact, exactly, you're wearing the blue ribbon. One of the things that I really liked was a perspective that somebody was saying is like, when you look at how Israel talks about the war in Gaza, their entire thing is we're going to destroy Hamas. If you just change that kind of idea and flipped it and said, we're going to protect Jews. You're doing the exact same thing. But your message has a different connotation, right?
Yeah, he does do that.
No, I'm saying what's the, exactly. Yeah, of course it's always there. I'm saying,
Yeah,
my point is the emphasis, where is our emphasis? We don't, Hamas, that's not, the point isn't about Hamas. The point is about us.
right.
So for us, we need to destroy Hamas. You're gonna have it in the same sentence. But I will tell you that people are having the same question with moving mezuzahs, and that's where I wanted to find this answer.
Well, mezuzahs aren't as visible.
But people are afraid. It's like my front door, someone's gonna drive by and see my house is.
Yeah, but they're not quite as visible.
I understand. So here is this answer from Rabbi Moss. I live on the ground floor. It's a question, then I'll share his answer. I live on the ground floor of an apartment building right near the entrance. My front door is visible from the street. Any passerby can see my mezuzah. I am scared that this makes me and my children a target for all those haters out there. Am I justified in taking down my mezuzah, at least until things calm down? Right? He answers, I can understand your fears. Many of us are facing levels of anti-Semitism we didn't think existed anymore. But if you take your mezuzah down, you've let the terrorists into your home. Worse, you've let them take over your mind. The evil death cult that raised its ugly head on October 7 and its sympathizers and apologists around the world are a force of terrible darkness. They want Jews to disappear from the face of the earth. If we fearfully retreat into anonymity, that only emboldens those forces of evil. Darkness can only win when light recedes. When the light shines, darkness is immediately banished. We have to shine our Jewish light right now. Retreating is not an option. We all need to be more outwardly Jewish. We can't Jew down. We have to Jew up. So,
I know.
well,
Yeah.
so he said, don't remove your mezuzah. Put up more on your other doors. Don't hide your Jewishness. Wear it publicly and proudly. Don't avoid Jewish gatherings. Attend as many as you can. Not a shul goer, become one. Sending kids to non-Jewish school, time to switch ones where they'll be safe and learn who they are. And then he adds, of course, your mezuzah is your protection, because this was a question about mezuzah.
Yeah.
A sign that your home is proudly Jewish every time you pass it. And that's, it's the same thing for your menorah. I will tell you, and he ends off, we don't cower in the face of evil. We shine our light stronger, live more Jewishly. Let's all Jew up, since you don't like it. He wrote it twice. But yeah, I think it's normal to have the moment where you're like in your mind, what am I doing? But then you embolden yourself.
So there's a 13-year-old young man
Yeah.
for whom I have been a mentor.